Shalom, Erev Tov, good evening from Jerusalem, Israel. This is Lowell Joseph Gallen, founder of the Root and Branch Association Limited, established in 1981 in New York State, in God of Israel, bless America, and now celebrating our 40th anniversary. I would like to welcome our viewers and listeners worldwide and our live Zoom studio audience to this evening's program in our Root and Branch Association Limited English Language Conference and Lecture Series broadcasting from Jerusalem, Israel. And now celebrating the start of our second quarter century, our second 25 years. As I always do at the beginning of each program, Hakarat Tatov, recognizing the good, we thank our hosts for the first 25 years, from January 1995 until December 2020, the Orthodox Union of America Israel Center, 22 Karen Hayesod Street, gave us a welcome home to start from nothing and build up to where we are today. And especially we want to thank the Educational Director Emeritus and founder and editor emeritus of the remarkable Torah Tidbits publication, Mr. Phil Chernovsky, his wife, his Eshet Chayil, woman of valor, Mrs. Tony Chernovsky, and the long-suffering Mrs. Itta Rachel Russick, the scheduler who keeps all the trains coming in and out of Grand Central Station over there. I don't know how she does it. I would have been carried on a stretcher a long time ago. Thank you to all of you. Now, today is Wednesday, June 16, 2021, in the Gregorian calendar, and the sixth day of Tammuz 5781 in the Hebrew Israelite calendar. We like to give historical context. What happened around this time some years ago on May 16th. I was wrong, I was saying May 19th. May 16th, 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising against the Nazis came to an end. On June 5th, 1967, the miraculous Six-Day War began here in the land of Israel. And on June 6, 1944, Allied armies, primarily American, Canadian, and British, landed at Omaha and other beaches in Normandy to begin the liberation of France and Europe from Nazi Germany. We are here today because of sacrifices made then, so we should always remember them. Now, we are broadcasting from the land of Israel, city of God, Jerusalem, Hill of the Priests, Givat Hananiah, Abu Tur, overlooking Mount Moriah, where we believe that the third and final Israelite temple of Jerusalem will soon be under reconstruction and stand forever as per the prophet Ezekiel's vision. Please see the biblical book of Ezekiel, chapters 40 through 48. The Root and Branch Association promotes faith in the God of Israel who created us all, a study and practice of universal Jewish teachings within the framework of the Noahide covenant and laws. Please see Genesis chapter 9. If you are a Christian, please also see the book of Acts chapter 15. And for all to honor God's land, Torah, and people covenants with his chosen people, Israel. And by Israel, we mean all 12 tribes who are in the process, we hope, of reuniting worldwide soon. Our speaker for this evening's program is old friend, Mr. Yair Davidiy, who will speak on the lost tribes of Israel and Scandinavia. Yair is a prolific researcher, writer, and speaker who founded the Brit Am and Hebrew Nations Organization. He'll get a proper introduction later when our program chair, Dr. Les Glassman, arrives home from his dental clinic. If you need a crown or a root canal or periodontia, whatever you need, new teeth, new mouth, go see Les in Jerusalem. He'll take care of you. And as we always do, we thank our friend, Zorba the Jew, Professor Ashram Natathias, born in a cave in Nazi-occupied Greece in 1943, who hosts our monthly Greek Jewry Through the Ages seminar And we are privileged that on many of our programs, Professor Mattathias and join us as a panelist from the 5 towns in Long Island. Now, without further ado, two more points. One is I always dedicate each program now in memory and honor of another panelist who is with us, though you can't see him, Lieutenant Colonel Martin Gallen, my father, whose body returned to the earth and whose soul returned to the heavens on October 16, 2018, the age of 98. He was in ROTC at City College in the 1930s. In 1942, entered active service, the United States Army as lieutenant, European theater, concluded the war as a captain, and then joined the Army Reserve and retired as lieutenant colonel. My father was buried with full military honors by United States Army Honor Guard in Westchester County on October 16, 2018. He is with us here today. And in terms of prophetic time, this ancient Israelite artist believes that it is the 95th day of the second year of the regenerating 5th Israelite monarchy of Daniel's vision. Please see the book of Daniel, chapter 2, verse 44, which he believes began on Rosh Chodesh Nisan 1 year and 3 months ago. So, without further ado, I will introduce our speaker, Mr. Davidiy, and later, Dr. Glassman will give him a proper, more in-depth introduction. Yair, I'm handing this over to you. Thank you so much.
Shalom. Shalom, Ari. Hello. How are you? I'm here. You're interested in the lost 10 tribes in Scandinavia. So we analyzed the question of the lost 10 tribes. Where did the lost 10 tribes go to? Originally, you had the Hebrews came out of Egypt. We had Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. Yaakov was renamed Israel. There were 12 sons, gave rise to 12 tribes. Actually 13, because the tribe of Joseph was divided into 2, Ephraim and Manasseh. But the Bible, the Tanakh, always maintains a quorum of 12 by either counting Ephraim and Manasseh as one tribe of Joseph, or counting both Ephraim and Manasseh as separate tribes, but not counting Levi. But nevertheless, technically there were 13 tribes of Israel. The Israelites came out of Egypt. They were in the wilderness. They received the Torah. They came into the land of Canaan and they conquered it and settled in it. At the beginning, they were ruled by a series of judges, leaders, charismatic leaders, one could say, inspired holy people. After that came the period of the kings. The first king was King Saul from the tribe of Benjamin. Then David and Solomon. Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem. After Solomon came Rehoboam, in English transliteration, Rehoboam, in the time of Rehoboam, 10 of the tribes separated. They set up their own kingdom in the north, headed by Jeroboam, Yeravam in Hebrew. He set up his own entity, actually containing numerically, demographically, the bulk of the Hebrew peoples of that time. And so they continued as 2 separate nations, one alongside the other. At times they fought with each other, at times they cooperated in different ways. But nevertheless, they were separate. They went their separate ways. After about almost 200 years, the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, and they took all of the 10 tribes into exile. They took a portion of them, or most of them, overland into the regions of the Assyrian Empire. Others, they settled in their colonies overseas using Phoenicians, that is, people, Canaanites, from the cities of Tyre and Sidon, and also Philistines, who identified, according to archaeological findings, with Mycenaean Greek or Minoan from Crete. Findings, actually, the Philistines were also participants of that culture. So they too helped the Assyrians to settle people overseas. So we had 2 pathways of divisions of the Israelite nation, of those exiles who were taken away, and incidentally, all of the northern kingdom was taken. the 90% of the Northern Kingdom was destroyed, was burnt. All the cities were burnt according to archaeological evidence that proves this. And the people disappeared almost altogether. There were some remnants got to Jerusalem, which increased at that stage, at the stage of destruction of the Northern Kingdom's population increased. Actually, in what's now the Jewish quarter, received an influx of population of refugees from the northern tribes. Nevertheless, this was only a small minority, and most of the Israelites were exiled. And not only were most of the northern Israelites from the 10 tribes were exiled, but also a good portion of Jews from the kingdom of Judah when Sennacherib invaded Jerusalem shortly after he'd taken away the lost 10 tribes have been 10 tribes have been taken away. Also, Judah was invaded. A good portion of Judah was also taken. They joined up the 10 tribes in their places of exile, and they accounted as part of them. Nahmanides, in his book of Redemption, Sefer Guli, speaks of this at length, and he tells us how the Bible looks at things, how we look at things, how we to consider things. So the main bulk of the 10 tribes were taken into exile. They went to different portions of the Assyrian Empire, and after permutations, different overthrows of kingdoms and joining and becoming independent of the Assyrians and joining up other peoples, and they moved to the north. They were already close. Many of them had already been settled close to the Caucasus regions. They moved north of the Caucasus. From there, they moved northward, and they entered Scandinavia. Others of them had been taken by the proxies of the Assyrians to Spain, to portions of Britain, also possibly to Scandinavia itself. And at that time, the climate was different. Scandinavia enjoyed a Mediterranean type of climate, and the cultivation of the soil continued much further north than it does at present. And archaeologists have found the Bronze Age Scandinavia. Bronze Age Scandinavia was connected with the Mediterranean area. They found findings, they find relics, they find types of furniture similar to those of Egypt, similar to those of Mycenaean Greece, similar to those of the Phoenicians, also in some way similar to those of Israel. And this is accepted. This is incidentally, this is not some hidush. It's not a new finding that we are putting on people, placing before people. It is known. This is known. It's in Scandinavia. It's accepted in academic circles. I have a book here. A lot of books here. But one of these books. This is the Rise of Bronze Age Society. It's an academic work. It's accepted in academic circles, and he describes it with full of illustrations what happened in Bronze Age Sweden and Scandinavia in general, where they had a lot of findings that are identical with those of the Middle East and the Near East area. So it is accepted that culturally, Bronze Age Sweden had an ethnic influx of newcomers from the Middle East area. So logistically, to say that a portion of them, or a good number of them, were from Israel, is not logistically improbable. It is not, because others were there, or people from bearing a similar type of culture were there, and this is accepted. And the lost tribes of Israel, these tribes, they meet not only in Scandinavia, but also in a good portion of Western Europe, in the Netherlands, in France, in Switzerland. You find evidence of Israelites being there, also in the British Isles, in Ireland, throughout Scotland, in England, Wales. We find evidence of Israelites having been there, and the Scandinavian input, the Scandinavian participation in this is what I said, is that a participation of one portion of Israelite tribes reached Scandinavia. And we have a lot of proofs of this from all different ways. In general, the Bible says that the lost tribes will be in the north, to the northern land of Israel, will be to the north and the west, will be isles of the sea or in peninsulas. And they would be in areas that are associated with Western Europe. And we find amongst the peoples who populated Scandinavia, incidentally, Scandinavia went through a lot of changes. What I just told you about Bronze Age Scandinavia being connected to the Middle East, that is conventionally dated to long before the Lost in Tribes were exiled. So that is where we differ with the conventional academic findings. We say that the dates should be much lower than they place them. But apart from that, they agree with us. So to the dolmens, they agree that the dolmens megalithic monuments show a pathway of migration from the Middle East area, from the area of ancient Israel. They'll go through the Caucasus region into Bulgaria, to Southeast Europe, and then go up into Scandinavia, or across the sea to the British Isles and along the coast. This is also agreed upon, but the dates they place begin much long before the Lost Tribes were exiled, according to the conventional understanding. But we disagree with the dating. We find the traces of Israelites in Scandinavia. We're not saying that the Scandinavians are all descended from Hebrews. We are saying that there was a portion of some Lost Tribes in Scandinavia. A portion of the people do descend from Israelites. And the Israelites there did have an influence upon the national characteristics of the people there. And so it could be that a good portion of the people are of Israelite descent. What portion exactly it pertains to, we cannot say. But we can say that historically it has an influence, and it is there to see, and it can be proven. I'll give you, for example, Sweden. We identify Sweden with the tribe of Gad. Sweden was founded, the country of Sweden was founded when the Goths and the Svea, people known as the Svea, joined together. It had been divided into two parts. The Svea, also known as the Suoni, according to Tacitus, the Roman historian, and the Goths, or the Guti, also known as Guti. And when they joined together, they created the country of Sweden. Okay, so the Goths were an important element within the formation of Sweden. The very name Goth in Hebrew, in ancient Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, could be pronounced as Gad. We have the O sound in Goth, in Gad, in Temanit. The Temanim also have a type of Hebrew, pronounced Hebrew similar to it as it was in biblical times. So they would have pronounced it Gad as Goth or something similar. D without an accent, it could have been pronounced as a Tha. So we have Goth being pronounced the same way, another form of pronunciation of the word Gad. And also in Gothic place names in Sweden, we often find it pronounced as Gad. So not only could Goth be another pronunciation of Gad, but Gad was another pronunciation for Goth. So we have a direct one-on-one, according to the names identification. The Sweons, Swea, also known as Sweon. So the firstborn son of Gad was Shuon. And it's in the northern tribes, where in words that we pronounce as Shin, they often pronounce as Sa. Without the SH sound, we also find Shibboleth, the famous story in the Bible, where they wanted to determine who is from the tribe of F1, asked him to say Shibboleth. Instead of saying Shibboleth, it was Shibboleth. And so we find this too. So the Swea, or the Sweons, have also the same name as Shuoni, a son of Gad. Another son of Gad was Harodi, and he had the Herudi, or the Harudi Goths. Important in Scandinavia, had the same name. Also, they had the Haroli, son of Gad, and the Heruli were also an important element, people in Scandinavia associated with the Goths. And we have we use a lot of different sources. So one of the sources we use, just a second, is rabbinical sources. We use rabbinical sources. This is this book, a very good book by Fisher Ma'al, Shiftei Yisrael. He goes into the characteristics, the personality characteristics of each of the tribes, according to biblical sources and rabbinical commentators. It has nothing to do with us. He knows about us, so he spoke to him on the phone. But he worked entirely without any knowledge of us, without any idea of who those 10 tribes whatsoever. Just he was what interested him. He was the personality of each of the different tribes, according to the sources, and how the sources describe them. So he says about Gad. Gad, as the word Gad, the name Gad has several different connotations. One of them is connected to Gedud. Gad Gedud Yigudenu. And when Jacob gave the name Gad to his son, or when the name Gad was given to Gad, it was a Gedud Gidudenu. It's associated with the word Gedud, meaning group of people. And according to Fishel Ma'al, the characteristic of Gad is to be concerned with the group, the individual functioning as part of a group, not standing out, but a group working together. And this is, of all the peoples on earth, the Swedes have this characteristic. The Swedes are known of this. No man left behind. The Swedes don't like people taking charge. They like to sit around and decide things, to do things as groups, as a group of people, and they succeed in it. And they look after each other. They have a concept of social welfare, communal social welfare, that everyone is looked after, but everyone gives, and it works for them because the people that also have this consciousness to work for the group, to do what the group needs, and to be part of it. And they don't like people putting themselves outside of the group or not working in tandem with the group. And this, according to the characteristic of Gad, is a tribal characteristic of Gad. This is where we find them. Amongst the Swedes, and we find tribal names connected to Gad amongst peoples who comprise the Swedish nation. And we had in Scandinavia itself, we had their relationship to the Jews was not as good as it should have been at all times, but we had exceptional people who helped, who did things. Raoul Wallenberg, who saved a lot of Jews in Hungary, was sent by the Swedish government to do that, and this is what he did. Also, the Swedes were neutral in the Second World War, but they helped the Allies. They were in a difficult position and helped Allies much more than they helped the Nazis. The merchant marine, the least the merchant marine were 8,000 sailors to the British, to the Allies, and they was working for them. And the Germans couldn't do much about it. Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, when he came to visit Sweden, he saw the people and he felt contempt for them. He said they're blonde on the outside and half Jewish on the inside. So this element was recognized by the enemies of the Israelite people, recognized this element. This is a Hebrew element within the Swedish nation. And so too we have the Norwegians. We have the Norwegians, we relate Norwegians to the tribe of Naphtali. We had the Naphthalite Huns. The Naphthalite Huns were a people in Central Asia. That was their name. They were known as the Naphtali or Naphtalites. Naphtalites, white Huns is another name given to them because they were associated with the Huns, but they were white, as distinct from the Huns, who were somewhat intermixed with Chinese people and so on, or similar to them. So the Naphthalite Huns in about the 500, 600 CE, they invaded Norway. There were already people living in Norway who were similar to them, but they came into Norway, invaded Norway, took it over. They were much more numerous than the native inhabitants. They didn't drive other people out, but they intermixed with them and settled alongside them. And the demographic weight of all these newcomers coming in drove the Norwegians and also the Danes, also the same happened in Denmark, drove the Norwegians and the Danes and also a portion of the Swedes to indulge in overseas excursions that gave us the Vikings. The Vikings who invaded Ireland, invaded England, the British Isles, Scotland, England. They invaded France. They created the state of Normandy. It was created by Rollo, by a Viking group. And from Normandy, they conquered England, and they gave us Norman civilization, which was quite advanced. So historically, they were important. And so that was their name. Naphtali. They're named after Naphtali. Cylinder was a son of of Naphtali. And Naphtali has some different characteristics. And Naphtali was described as a hind, a female deer. A female deer. So the commentator said, why was Naphtali described as a female deer? Because he was fast, he was quick, he had alacrity, and he was and it is faster than the male. So Naphtali was called after the female deer. But you also see another point. Incidentally, all of the tribes, each one of the tribes had, according to the Midrash, had an animal symbol. They had the main as a symbol, an ordinary symbol, and they also had an animal as a symbol. We know 6 or 7 of the symbols, don't know all of them, but the Midrash says that each and every one of them had this, and this animal symbol of Naphtali was a female deer. And so it's, incidentally, the Norwegians are quite masculine. They're not city type of people. They're quite masculine, outgoing, physically impressive, as a lot of Scandinavians are. But they are named after, their symbol was a female deer, and they also have this feminine aspect there. One could say they're conscious of their female side, and they been the foremost promoter of women's rights, for better or for worse, in the world. They also, in their foreign aid, they try and encourage the granting of recognition of women's rights in foreign countries. Very big on that. About more than half of their members of parliament, not members of parliament, of their prime ministers have been women. Iceland is an island off the coast of Norway. It belongs to Norway. It is partially Norwegian. It's independent, but it's strongly associated with Norway. And in Iceland, you find this aspect of women's participation even more pronounced than in Norway. But both Norway and Iceland are known for this as something which they're known about. It's interesting that the animal female symbol was a female deer. In other words, they gave most nations, most people consider themselves a warrior people, masculine and macho type. That is an ideal that many people have. Their role type, and so they prefer a male animal. But Naphtali accepted, actually, possibly chose a female deer. So this is an aspect of Naphtali which we find in Norway. We also find in Denmark, we have the Danes. The Danes are renamed Danes. They call themselves Dan. And their ancestor was Dan the Great. Dan the Great was the son of someone called Humble, humility. And the name Yaakov connotes this. Yaakov is named after Acre, but it also has a connotation of humility. So the father of Dan was Dan the Great in Danish mythology was named Humble, and Dan the Great gave rise to the Danish people, according to what they themselves say that they're named after Dan. They also have legends and traditions that not everyone recognizes, but have ancient, go back way to the early Middle Ages, at least, that they are descent from Israel. There were also the Jutes living there. The Jutes have the same name given, Utes, given to Jews, and the Jutes were a portion of Judah associated with Dan in biblical times. He was a neighbor of Dan. He was a neighbor of Dan, and Dan and entities from Judah throughout their peregrinations, throughout their migrations before they got to Denmark, often associated together, different groups from Judah, together with people from Dan. Incidentally, getting back to Norway, another thing about Norway is that when Naphtali was in the land of Israel, he was settled along the Sea of Tiberias, the Sea of Galilee. Again, the Sea of Galilee, which is actually a Kinneret. It's actually a large lake of fresh water. It's quite large now. It contains a good portion of Israel's water resources, reserves. In the past, it was much bigger than it now is. Even now, there are people who fish there. In the past, fishing was much more important. And Naphtali was settled along the shores of the Sea of Galilee, along the shores of Gennesaret. All along the shore, the western shore, was Naphtali. Naphtali was settled there, and Naphtali had the little farms along the coast, and he engaged in fishing. When the Naphthalite Huns came to Norway, they did the same. They settled along the coast, and guess what? They engaged in fishing. And how do they engage in fishing? Because the herring. Even now, Naphtali the Norwegians are famous for herring. In the past, in the herring season, masses of herring migrate up there in order to breed. And there were times when you could dip your hand in the sea water and pull out a bundle of fish, of tasty, large herring. Swarms and swarms of them. Now it's changed. It's not so the tidal waves, so the pathways of the tides have changed. Sea currents have changed. There's been a global changes in climate and geography. And then too, the same thing was happening. So before the Naphtalites came to Norway, the herring were going elsewhere, maybe to England, maybe along the coast of Western Europe somewhere. When the Naphtalites came about the same time, the sea currents changed and brought all the herring up there. In other words, we used to have a joke. We used to have a joke in Israel when the Jews from Russia started coming to Israel in the great masses. It was a couple of 1 or 2 years when hundreds of thousands of them were coming every day, or a lot of them were coming all the time. See on the streets new Russians coming. And at that time it was snowing. It was snowing in Israel. So it doesn't snow every year in Israel. It was snowing quite heavily, and this happens once every couple of years. So we used to have the joke to say to the Russian immigrants that they brought the snow with them from Russia. So he could have said the same thing about Naphtali. When Naphtali got up to Norway, he brought the fish with him. And another thing of interest, possible interest, is that today the Norwegian economy is based a major provider of sustenance to the Norwegians. Now, Norwegian economy is quite good, and people live quite a good standard of living, thanks in part to oil, to reserves of petroleum along the coast. And this is very important in the Norwegian economy. In Hebrew, petroleum oil is neft. They have the word Naphtali, neft, petroleum from God. Ariel, that in Hebrew, neft means petroleum, means oil for machines, and that Naphtali provides more of petroleum resources than any other country outside of the Middle East, and it's very important for them. So we also, incidentally, in America, the Norwegians were in the Second World War. They were quite important. They were more important than we realize. Hitler had to have 500,000 people along the North German coast, and also in Norway. 500,000 people permanently of the German army, permanently in effect incapacitated, permanently stationed there. So a lot of soldiers along the North German coast, because he was afraid that the Allies would invade through North Germany. Hitler was quite capable of doing it, often thought about doing it. They would invade along the German coast and through Norway. And because the Norwegians could not be relied upon not to join the Allies when they did that. And the Norwegians helped the Germans get the atomic bomb. They sabotaged heavy water installations, and they did quite a bit in their own way. The Norwegians were quite important. We had an important Norwegian in America, Norman Borlaug. Norman Borlaug was a scientist. He was very prominent in the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution was in the 50s, in the 60s, 70s, more in the 60s. Green Revolution was a combination of American governmental bodies as well as NGOs, important NGOs. They paid scientists to find new ways of producing crops crops for Asia, crops for undeveloped countries, Mexico, Latin America, crops would be disease resistant to crop disease, easier to harvest, resistant to rodents, and also more bountiful, more productive. And they found them, and they did introduced a lot of agricultural reformations, innovations, and they say by virtue of that, hundreds of millions of people, an enormous number of people are now alive because of that. They would have died of starvation if it had not been for the Green Revolution. And one of the most important scientists and public figures behind this was Norman Borlaug, and he was of Norwegian origin. So we have Norwegians who were quite important. Norwegian. Also, we have Senator Jackson, who was in the U.S. Senator, was very important in getting support for Israel in a time when there was not taken for granted. He helped to lay the foundations for ongoing U.S. support for Israel. Also laid the background, set up the background for the Jews from Russia to be let out and come to Israel, also come to America. So we had Norwegians who did a lot of good in the world and were quite productive. So to the Danes in the Second World War, they refused to surrender the Jews to the Nazis. Many of them adorned these, put the Star of David on their arm. And the whole country got together and they took all the Jews of Norway and they put them on ships and took them across the sea into Sweden. And the Swedish government agreed to look after them for the duration of the war as guests of the Swedish government on behalf of the Danes. So this is well known. So this is something that they stood out for. And that was the Danes. The Danes are descended from Dan. They were named after Dan. They have other groups within them, also descended from Israel. And in general, they are part of the complex of nations that we identify as being descended from Israel. It includes the people of Scandinavia, also includes the Finns. The Finns had their own traditions. The Finns in the past had a lot of traditions that recall Jewish ones. Even that they had a chuppah, even the similar names, chuppah for marriage, and they have written about that. It is well known in Finland itself, or is not well known. It is known, and researchers by Finnish people have been done on this, and they're quite convincing that amongst the Finnish people there was elements from Israel. Incidentally, the Finnish people now they're several million. But in the past, they were a much smaller number. They increased and multiplied from a small demographic base, similar perhaps to the Ashkenazi, similar to what experts say about the Ashkenazim, that was what they call a bottleneck. They had a large number of people who came down to a small number, like a large number of people, and then because of all kinds of calamities or changes in the world, they were reduced to a small number. Like a bottle, like the neck of a bottle, and from that they expanded, so that all of those expanded are related to the regional few. So the same thing happened in Sweden and Finland, and also in other parts, also in Scandinavia in general, so that everyone is related to some degree to everyone else. As we were saying, the Scandinavia is part of the continuum, a cultural and ethnic continuum of peoples. It includes those of Scandinavia. It also includes the Netherlands. The Netherlands also received a lot of people from Scandinavia. In the past, many of the peoples now living in the Netherlands, they came from Scandinavia. Also Belgium, France, the same as Switzerland and the British Isles, and the offshoots of the British Isles in the USA, Australia, America, and so on. And each and every one of these countries has its own definitions, its own uniqueness that are reflected in biblical and rabbinical analysis of the tribal characteristics, and also complemented and supplemented and confirmed by historical sources. The lost 10 tribes, according to the Bible, would be, as we said, would be in the west, would be in the north and the west, would be facing it, associated with ships of Tarshish. There's ships who travel across the Atlantic Ocean, associated with the Atlantic Ocean, and other points. Also to be relatively blessed, agricultural plenty, mineral wealth. They were to be powerful people. They were to set an example for others. And this is what the Scandinavians have done, both in their own country and as participants in the greatness that came out of Britain and came out of the USA. Just as an overall, I'd like to point out what was the point of it all. This is an overall. This is something how we understand what was the divine plan behind this. Why did the lost Gentiles have to get lost in the first place? Okay, and what makes them different from the Jews? So how we understand it from the Jewish sources, from rabbinical sources, and also from the Bible, confirmed by the Bible. Originally, the Israelites came out of Egypt. Israelites were one big people, and Christians multiplied in Egypt. They came out of Egypt. They went through the Red Sea. They went into the wilderness. They received the Torah at Sinai. They came into the land of Canaan. They conquered it. And they were supposed to keep the law and become a great nation. They set up the temple, and they had the kingdom of David, the kingdom of Solomon, all over the Middle East, quite an important country. And they were supposed to do then what the Messiah will do in the future. They were supposed to be a powerful nation to impose upon the Gentile peoples through example, through persuasion, also in certain cases through exercise of force, to bring all of the Gentile peoples to receive the truth, that is the worship of the God of Israel, and to abide by certain basic rulings, and also to come up to Jerusalem and to be part of a united humanity headed by Israel. And together with doing this geopolitical task, they're also supposed to keep the Torah and to develop the Torah. The Torah needs to be developed. The Torah is there. But you have to learn it and understand it and delve into it and know what it wants one to do. So they were supposed to do both of these things together, and it was too big for them. I got all over him, as they say in Hebrew. It was too big for them, and the world was not ready for it, and they were not ready for the world. They couldn't do it, and there were certain inattentions. So divine providence, as you have to say, split them in half. It took the lost 10 tribes and it sent them into exile. And the intention was this, incidentally basing the Rav Kook mentions this, also Hasidim mentioned this as a found in Jewish sources concept of Mashiach ben David, who is also taken to represent the 10 tribes in general, to go down to the level of the Goyim, of the Gentiles, to go down to their level, to forget who they are, and to come up, to evolve upwards, and to bring the rest of the world with them. It was the task of the 10 tribes. And the task of Judah was to develop the law. This is what Judah has done. This is what the 10 tribes in their own way have done. Much of what we have today, for the good and the bad, but most of the good, the world has evolved. The world is a better place than it was a few centuries ago, and from most perspective. On the whole, people are more important. People are concerned for the welfare of each other more than they were in the past. Especially the Western nations. This is mostly due to the Western nations. This is mostly due to the British, the Americans, and also the Scandinavians and the Dutch in their own way, the Swiss in their own way, and the French in their own way. And amongst all of these peoples do we find descendants of lost tribes of Israel. This is what the lost tribes had done, and this is what they did do to some degree. And in the future, they will resolve their own dynamics, and they will be prepared and able to rejoin with Judah. And also Judah is also now developing its own political apparatus, its own political conceptions. It is also evolving towards them. And the two houses will eventually come together, as we find in the prophecy of Ezekiel 37, and also Isaiah chapter 11, and also in Jeremiah 3 and 31, and in other places throughout the Bible. So do you have any questions on that? Is there any questions? Anyone want to...
I just want to make a suggestion. Lal, is it possible? First of all, Yair, I really want to thank you so much for your outstanding presentation. So interesting. And I just want to show you something quite interesting. It's what you said as well. So this is a very interesting if you look over here, this is a stamp of a Jewish woman lighting Shabbos candles. And here's the first day cover, which is signed from the chief rabbi. But the stamp is actually from Denmark, and it's in 1984. It was issued to commemorate the occasion of the 300th anniversary of the establishment of the Jewish community in Copenhagen. And the philatelic cover is autographed by the artist, Marianne Nagler, and the chief rabbi of Copenhagen, Brent Melchior. So here we have a Denmark with a Sefer Torah postmark, and here's the beautiful stamp of candles from Denmark. So what you said, it's really true. I was in Tampere, in Finland. I don't know if you've touched on about Finland as well. And I went with my kippah. It was a few years ago for a stamp exhibition, and I was amazed to see how people came up to me because I was wearing a kippah, and there was so many said, "We love Israel," and they were so, because having worn a yarmulke, the new Israeli representative at that exhibition. In fact, our flight, there was I think a 3-weekly flight to Finland from Israel. They have, and after the COVID, I hope it will resume, but they have many tourists from Finland, Christian tourists coming to Israel, and that's how we went. When we went to Lithuania, we also took the flight to Finland first, and then we went to Riga, but from Helsinki. But being in Helsinki as well, I walked around, my wife and I, with a yarmulke, and we were very well, we felt very accepted there. It was actually quite unbelievable. So what you say, unfortunately, what's happening, and if you could touch on this as well, in Sweden, in certain areas, because of the influx of so many Muslims, it's actually quite unsafe for Jews to walk around now. Things have changed. So I don't know if you could touch on that as well. There's certain areas in Sweden where it's actually very dangerous. In fact, about a week and a half ago, a non-Jew put on a kippah, and he was beaten up because they thought he was Jewish. This was in Sweden. So I'm going to give over to you, and then we'll get to our distinguished panelists as well. But I want to thank you for your amazing, insightful, and very interesting presentation.
Leslie, apropos of your comment, it is surprising to me that those areas, more specific Norway, I think, in today's setting, are so anti-Semitic, or at least they pass laws that to restrict kashrut, for example, or to restrict shochetim, as being antithetical to humane treatment of animals. Even circumcision. Can you imagine circumcision is being debated? So that's number one that you might like to address. But I'm flabbergasted that there is such an inquiry as to the lost tribes of Israel, the 10 of them, having found a home in Scandinavia. Frankly, it is a surprise, and yet not so, because there is such a thing as a movement of Nordic Israelites. There is an interest in discovering that there is a connection. So to the extent that you advance that connection through your research, you're welcome. Maybe we are, after all, connected to the future development of Anglo-Saxon law and tolerance that came along through the Protestant Reformation. Who knows? But among those Scandinavian countries, I have a special place in my heart for Denmark, of course, because 95% of their Jews survived because of the identity
Right.
of the population with the Jews as being part of the nation, part and
Yes.
parcel of the nation. And I don't know how apocryphal is the legend that King Christian X rode around. Of course, he did ride around on his horse, and he was greeted by his subjects. And the Germans were astounded that they asked one local resident why doesn't he even have a bodyguard. You know, can you imagine in today's
Right.
times he was going around without a bodyguard, and the Dane responded, the whole of Denmark is his bodyguard. I mean, this is
Wow.
astounding, astounding, and it's uh, awe-inspiring. Um, um, so 95%, as I said, of the Jews there survived by going to Sweden. So I give them that. I also give Sweden kudos for the martyr, former and late Secretary General of the United Nations, and we have a plaza named after him in New York City near the
Right.
United Nations called Dag Hammarskjöld. I love that man, even though he was trying to be even-handed in the conflict between the Arabs and Israel. So I'm throwing all of that for your very interesting comment. Of course, Norway is infamously connected to the Quisling of World War II. You know, again, they cooperated to the fullest with the Nazis. So
Can I add something here?
yeah,
The year, I know you have many thoughts of your own, but I just like to throw in some footnotes. The Jew hatred in Scandinavia is not too difficult to figure out. They're Lutheran countries. They got it from Martin Luther. At the
yes,
beginning of
yes,
his
yes,
life, Martin
yes,
Luther wrote his essay that Jesus was born a Jew.
yeah,
The Jews at the time thought he's the new Cyrus. And not only did Martin Luther not convert Jews to his new faith, which he thought would be this kind of like Moshe Rosen Jews for Jesus of his time,
Yeah.
sort of dress up Christianity in a tallis and tefillin, and Jews will join my faith. That did not only did that not happen, but rabbis in Germany were converting Martin Luther's followers to Judaism, and he didn't like that. At the end of his life, he got a little crotchety and wrote on the Jews and their lies.
Yeah.
And Hitler said two of his favorite Christian theologians were Martin Luther and John Chrysostom. John Chrysostom is for the Eastern churches.
yeah.
So it's not too difficult to figure out where, even if they become secular, we discussed this before, it's in the subconscious, it's in their spiritual genetics, it's imprinted in them for hundreds of years. Having said that, in each country, there was always everywhere a small, extremely pro-Nazi group. Quisling, incidentally, before he became a Quisling, people forget this, was a socialist. Look it up. And Pierre Laval was a socialist. So the question is, how did people who promoted these beautiful ideas of socialism turn like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde into Nazi vassal puppet rulers? I don't know the answer to the question, but it's worth looking into. So as Asher can tell you from Greece, in each country you had people who were either indifferent or were afraid for their lives. Not everyone's going to be a hero. Some were pro-Nazi, some were anti-Nazi. It's difficult to say in any particular country that the entire population was pro or anti. Well, in the case of Albania, they were anti, and the Albanian Christians and Muslims stopped their endless feuding. Asher and I were talking, okay, let's stop the Hatfield and McCoys. We got to save the Jews. Afterwards, we'll go back to killing each other for what your ancestors said 700 years ago to my ancestors. I'll kill you later. Meanwhile, let's save the Jews. Not only was every Jew in Albania, well, there weren't that many, saved by their Muslim and Christian neighbors, but thousands came in from Macedonia and other places. And this is a story which can't be told enough, but that's on the side. So let's go back to Yair, he has this phenomenal knowledge of, well, let's put it this way. Until Elijah and Mashiach ben David will be here, none of us knows for sure. But if I were asked who I would like to have as my relatives, I'd have no objection to the Danes, the Swedes, the Norwegians. And the Finns, I can think of worse relatives. I think they do a lot of good for Israel if we could use a few 100,000 of them here. They have master traditions in craftsmanship and many tremendous skills in so many different areas. But that's, let me not get off to the side. I just wanted to mention about the Jew hatred that one finds in these countries in people who on the surface may seem to, well, you're secular, but you're not. And as another footnote, Ingmar Bergman, the director, was a big Nazi. He never recanted it, even a phony recant. And the founders of IKEA were big Nazi supporters. That's a fact they don't want, they try to keep hidden. So yes, the Third Reich had its very active supporters all over the place. But let's hand it over to Yair. I just wanted to throw in about Martin Luther. Oh, one more point regarding moving places. If you think that Martin Luther and his mentor, when he was still a priest, walked all the way to Rome, people moved. It's not that far. I mean, I never tried it. If you would walk from northern Assyria to Scandinavia, how long would it take? I don't know, a couple of months. But, you know, people, historically, there have been tremendous migration. So what would be so strange about the idea that people from northern Eastern Turkey, northern Iraq, northern Iran would move anywhere, whether east to Japan and China, or into Southeast Asia, or into southern Russia, and then up the rivers to Scandinavia? It's not, the world's not that big, actually. If you walk long enough, you'll get on a boat, like the Polynesians and their boats going all over the Pacific, you'll get somewhere. So in terms of the logistics of moving over the Bosporus, you know, like John Hulley wrote that essay that the Sambatyon is the Bosporus, explained why, and going north into Europe. Logistically isn't such a big deal, is it? That's all I wanted to say. Now I'm going to mute my mic here.
Okay, so concerning anti-Semitism, this is true. First of all, the Scandinavians have a humanitarian outlook. They look after refugees. They take in Muslims. They're like a lot of left-wing people. Sometimes we have a problem in Israel itself. They have left-wing people who are more concerned with the Arabs than they are with the Jews. And they're more concerned with Arab rights than they are with Jewish rights. This is a phenomenon that is known. It's known in Israel, it's known in America, and apparently it's also found in Scandinavia. And the Scandinavians traditionally have had this humanitarian, humanistic outlook, left to center, left-wing inclined, wishy-washy, lovey-dovey type of personality. And this has been a source of strength for them. It's not always negative. In addition to that, we also find amongst the lost tribes, we find elements from the Canaan, descendants from Canaan also were there. Also Canaanites came in with them. They were intermixed with them, also still the land of Israel. There were also Edomites amongst them. These people are not always negative. In some cases, they have a positive contribution to give. For instance, it says in the Talmud, it says that no war can be won without the participation of Bnei Adam, without descendants of Esau leading the troops, supplying their martial qualities. We need them for certain reasons. We need everyone, or everyone can find their place, but they also have stronger indications than others to be against the Israelites, to be against the Jews. The Jews epitomize the rule of law, believing in God and living a moral life. And people who do not want that, do not live that life, are instinctively against it. Or people who set up their own gods, such as the Muslims do and the Christians to some degree do, also do. They are against the Jews for representing the truth, the biblical truth. And everyone has their own complexes and their own indications. Also, it should be noted that the lost 10 tribes were exiled. They were exiled according to the Bible in 2 Kings 17 and 2 Kings 18. Because they went in the ways of the nations around them. They intermixed with the Canaanites. They worshipped the Baal, they worshipped Asherah. And incidentally, this Canaanite type of religion, we find it later in the Scandinavia, almost under the same name. And the same type of outlooks. The same goddesses are found in ancient Scandinavia, as were known the Canaanites, and the Israelites were exiled for for going the way of these peoples, for adopting their customs, and also the Israelites themselves had stopped, according to the Midrash, keeping their circumcision. They had been against it, and so we find this.
But again, there was a time when Jews voluntarily ceased to circumcise their sons.
There are. I come from Australia. I heard of assimilated Jews who were not circumcising their children. It might be a very small percentage. Traditionally, every Jew, no matter how Hiloni, how secular he might be, certain things they always did, including circumcision. Right. But no, the phenomenon existed of Jews, Reformed Jews, not circumcising their children. Circumcision was not kept by all Jews throughout history.
Is that right? This is news to
But
me. I thought that even the Reform are united in that. Even agnostics, even atheist Jews. I know I encounter atheists because they say we are Jewish by culture. Coach, they still observe the tenet of circumcision. And now you're telling me that there may be a tiny fraction of Jews in the world who just do not abide by that.
So historically, and also in contemporary reality, there are Jews who do not circumcise their children, even though there's a small, but they exist.
Yeah, can I mention something?
What I wanted to talk about. Pardon? This is taking away what we're saying to some degrees. So, in other words, you always find anti-Semitism through everywhere where you find the lost tribes. You also find anti-Semitic elements. You find pro-Jewish people, elements, groups, people who instinctively, on the whole, are for the Jews, identify with the Jews, and also find people in the opposite direction. And so you have to take things into consideration, look at the cultural and historical context. At some time in the past, things were different. Things were it was much harder for Jews. Incidentally, I know that in the Shoah, there were people, survivors of the Shoah, did not want their children to circumcise their children. There's even a case in Haifa because they were afraid that God forbid the anti-Semites might return, and it would be important to be able to hide your Judaism.
Okay, Yair, can I say something on this? Just to Usher, to put you in the picture. Unfortunately, we have a distant family member where the son in our family, my wife and our family, where the son unfortunately married out, and it was very difficult for his mother and for the family to accept it, but they accepted it until he had twins, and the one was a boy and one was a girl, and his wife, the son's wife, said she promises that she'll allow to have a circumcision. When the time came for the circumcision, she refused. And I must tell you that more than anything else has upset the family, because it's really the total break. That's the brit, the covenant. And you actually see it, but unfortunately you realize that part of the family is going to be lost to Yiddishkeit forever. And not having their son have a breast upset the mother, because unfortunately the father had passed away, but it upset her more than anything else.
It's so ironic.
Unfortunately, it's real. It's a real tragedy, but it's unfortunate Israel. And Rav, what you say about after the Shoah, because that's during the Shoah when I've interviewed quite a few Holocaust survivors, and with the boys, some goyim wouldn't take children if they were boys because they knew that they could come and have a look if they're Jewish or not. That would identify that's the most, to identify if you're Jewish or not. So they would take sometimes the girls, but not the boys. So it resonates.
Paradoxically, circumcision has become so popular in general. Gentiles circumcise automatically their kids in the hospital before their return. And in my case, because of the very unique way that I was born in a cave during the occupation in Greece, instead of having my circumcision in 8 days, I learned later, of course, I had it in 8 months after the liberation of the country. back to the Greek situation, Greeks make it a point. Of course, their anti-Semitism is well known, but make it a point to say that they are perfect because they insist religiously and otherwise not to circumcise under any circumstances. And there have been cases in New York of Greek families, one family that became a cause célèbre, that took the hospital and the doctor to court because they did it automatically. And they said, no, we insist on no circumcision.
Okay. Oh,
in Australia and the USA, the majority of people, the majority of the citizens, especially those of Anglo-Saxon origin, are circumcised.
Yeah.
In Britain, they don't do it so much because the doctors are not used to it. They don't want to do it, and it costs money. You have to, it's not on the national health.
But it's for health.
So, and everywhere, every country is different. But and it is any country that is against circumcision in general, which is prejudicial to Jews, is anti-Semitic, and that is one of our signs. If a country, if people are anti-Semitic with certain criteria, if anti-Semitism is a recurring element in the national ethos, we consider them to be unlikely to be descendant of Israel. It counts against them. But there are other factors that outweigh this. Also, in Scandinavia, you have a phenomenon of Christianity. Most of Scandinavia are Lutherans, and Luther had both pro-Jewish and anti-Jewish elements in the Lutheran religion. Luther, towards the end of his life, had a daily conversations with the devil. He went crazy. He also wrote about against the Jews, and we fought throughout in Germany. The case was that the more religious the Lutherans were, the more anti-Semitism were. The power base of the Nazi Party was in Lutheran areas, even though many of the Nazis were themselves, including Nazis, were Catholic. Their power base was in Lutheran areas because where the people were more Lutheran, in Germany, they were more anti-Semitic. Whereas in Scandinavia, where people were more religious, that is Lutheran, believed more in the Bible, there they tended to be more pro-Jewish.
Wow.
And so too, in America, citizens of Scandinavians in the USA, the more religious they are, the more pro-Jewish, the more closer they feel to Israel. So we see the same element of Christianity is like a catalyst. Christianity serves as a catalyst to draw, in some cases, to draw those of Israelite descent closer to the Israelite, closer to their source, and for those who are not of Israelite descent, to distance them.
Okay. Can I mention something? I think you might find this a little interesting. I went to see a Holocaust survivor, and he was actually one of the children that was liberated in Auschwitz. And as I went into his home, he said to me, he saw that I was with a kippah, and he said to me, you know, I never believed in Hashem after the Shoah, but now I do. I said, well, how come? And he told me the most phenomenal story. His daughter actually married a German and went to Germany. She's an opera singer. And he said, afterwards with my children, I let them be free because I had such a restrictive life. And they had a son and a daughter, and her daughter's husband wouldn't allow their son to be circumcised. And it actually did upset him, this Holocaust survivor. Anyway, what happened is that he said, I really believe that there's God, because when he was 12 years old, he was having difficulty going to the toilet to make like a pee-pee. He couldn't. He was having great difficulty. And the doctor in Germany said to him, well, to the parents, he has to have a circumcision. And he had the circumcision at the age of 12. And he felt after that, suddenly he reconnected with Jewish friends, and he later had a bar mitzvah. And this Holocaust survivor said to me, I know there's a God, because when that happened, I started believing in Hashem again. It's amazing. His name's Tommy Schramm. He lives here in Israel. He was one of the few children that was the very famous picture of the children that were liberated from Auschwitz. And I went to see him, and he told me the story on video. And it really is actually quite amazing. And I just want to mention that in South Africa, a lot of the black tribes, like the
Right.
Zulus, and they do the circumcision, and they have a whole process where they do it, where they go out into the fields and they do it. And unfortunately, quite a few of them die because it's done like so in the rural areas. But I attended once a circumcision that has to be done in Baragwanath Hospital. It's the main hospital. And the non-Jewish doctor said to me, I couldn't believe it, but he said to me, because he knew I was Jewish, I had a yarmulke under my scrub cap. He said to me, your God's very clever. And I said to him, but he's your God as well. But anyway, he said, I said, why? He said, because on the 8th day, it's scientifically and medically proven, if ever you have to do a circumcision, it's the best time to do it. The blood vessels, they start to clot, the pain, everything. If you want to choose one day in a boy's life to do the circumcision, the 8th day is the best day to do it. And it was, I know we're off the topic, but it was so heartwarming hearing this coming from a top professor in Baragwanath in South Africa, saying how he's impressed that, my God, you when's the best day to do the circumcision.
I would like to add something at this point to the conversation of the sages here, and I mean that literally. The fact that people, Jews, Israelites get lost, nothing's ever really lost. I'll give you an example. When I came to Israel in 1978 after finishing college, I spent 4 months on Kibbutz Shluchot, which is in the Jordan Valley, right south of Beit Shan. There are a number of kibbutzim there, Sde Eliyahu, Tirat Tzvi. And on the kibbutz was a young man. He's now Rabbi Nissan Ben Avraham. I have to check. I think we're even friends on Facebook. We should invite him to speak. His family had 500 years earlier become Catholics, and they did not practice secretly as Moranos Conversos, B'nai Anusim. They really converted and wanted to hide everything, and they became very aristocratic and wealthy Spaniards. Somehow, I don't know how, he said, wait a minute. He found out that if he went back 500 years, there was the Jews in the family. He decided to look into this. He was disowned by his family. It wasn't like grandma lit candles behind curtains. What? No, absolutely not. He came to Israel. He converted al pi halakha and became a real rabbi, as he is today. I haven't spoken to Nissan. I have to check. I have it written down. We have so many people to invite to speak, especially if they're older people. I want to get them while they're still here without having to have Sir Arthur Conan Doyle arrange a seance. And he, out of nowhere, with no one's, the uncle said, well, you know, a spark lit in his soul after 500 years. I don't even know if this family speaks to him today. So the fact, for example, as Asher and I discussed with, you had to go, Les, with Dr. Katz about the assimilation rate. And I agree with Asher Yeshiva study, and I agree with Dr. Katz history studies. Even if someone gets lost, in the end, with the conservation of energy in the universe, energy can transform matter, but nothing's really lost. If Hashem wants to regenerate the living and resurrect the dead, as our prophecies say he will do it. If he wants to bring us back from the ends of the earth and the end of time, he will do it. And he is doing it. And then there are these astonishing stories about big anti-Semites like that guy in Hungary is, Asher will know this better than me, the leader of one of these, the Jobbik party, the Nazi party, and he's gung-ho, and he's the Jews this and the Jews that. One day goes to visit his grandmother, and she sews him the tattoo. He has a crisis. He could have swept it under the rug, But he didn't. He came out and said, I'm a Jew. And he left the party and he became a chassid or something. And my son-in-law from Poland talked about a brother and a sister who were in Poland busy, real skinhead Nazis, swastikas on Jewish graves, knocking them over, vandalizing the synagogues, the same thing. Grandma or grandpa was a Jew at Auschwitz or something like that. Now they're Hasidim. Now, there are times that doesn't happen, and or people have a very bad reaction to Jewish or partial Jewish ancestry, whereas it says in Isaiah chapter 15, your destroyers will come forth from among you. I give you a simple example. Who destroyed the temple? Tiberius. We have a city named, how can we have a city named after Tiberius? His uncle was Philo, the Moses Mendelssohn of his time. And he was worse than the Goyish. He had to show he's more Goyish than the Goyish. So with Vespasian, Tiberius was actually the one who handled destroying the temple. And he was pretty brutal even by Roman standards. He came from an upper class assimilated Jewish family. But again, Philo was considered, and he's respected by Christian and Muslim theologians and philosophers till today as a great mind. I would say Moses Mendelssohn is an unfair comparison. He was more like the Samson Raphael Hirsch of his day, combining Rabbi Dr. Samson Raphael Hirsch was a member of the parliament in whatever state he was in Germany at the time. Symbolized that the synthesis the way it's supposed to be, and yet his nephew, who went into the army, was the general who destroyed the temple. So we have that problem too, plaguing us throughout history. But no one's ever lost. You never know when they can come back, like Nazis whose kids have become very friendly to Jews in Israel and or in some cases converted. All I wanted to say, I'm saying in a very long-winded way, is when people get lost, and people are getting lost all the time, no one's ever lost forever. Who knows? And then I have to ask Yair, if one were to estimate the world 12 tribes population, if it includes the Pashtun and the Anglo-Celts and the Scandinavians, what are we talking about, 500 million people? That's a question, not a statement. I have no idea. I hand that over to Yair, who, now that John Hulley is gone, Yair is probably, I mean, yes, there's Shalva Weil and there's Harry Rosenberg and others, but in terms of his prolific output of research and scholarship, I don't know anyone else out there at the moment. Rabbi Eliyahu Avichail is gone, but he was very focused in certain areas in his Lost Tribes research. I don't know anyone out there anymore who has the kind of breadth of research that Yair does. So my question then is, okay, no one's ever lost. And how many Israelites are we talking about?
So we cannot say. We cannot point. The thing is, we cannot point to any individual and say, this person is definitely descended from Israel. So each and every one of them, also according to the Zohar, according to the Talmud Yerushalmi, Sanhedrin, when the lost 10 tribes return, they will convert. They will accept that this is similar, I imagine, similar to how they treated the Ethiopian Jews when they returned. That because of different problems in declaring and determining their Judaism for other reasons, they declared them to be non-Jewish, and they obliged them to carry out what's called a Hidush, a breach, renewal of the covenant. A renewal of the covenant is acceptable, and it is not demeaning. It's not that people. It's not saying these people are definitely not from Israel. We're just saying we want them to renew the covenant because of because of whatever the circumstances are, to remove all suffix, and it's better for them. In effect, halachically, this is the same as conversion. And so this, when the lost 10 tribes return, we don't know how they will return. We don't know what will happen. The sources indicate they will convert, and so we can leave it as something for to be solved in the future. And so this is the reality. The number of Israelites could be 300 million, it could be much more. This was part of the prophecies. This was the prophecy that was given to Abraham, given to Rabba. You will be hundreds of millions, according to one understanding of the blessing to Abraham. His seed would number hundreds of millions. And they would fill up the earth. They would be as the sand of the sea, as the stars of the heaven, as the dust of the earth. There would be an immense number of people. And they would be geographically, in the universal terms, of significance. So it could be hundreds of millions of people of Israelite descent they will return, or it could be much less. So if we look at the reality, geographical reality, we have the Jewish people. The Jewish people descended or represent the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. They were the tribes that formed the kingdom, or the core element of the tribe of Judah. And so they represent 3 tribes. And we have 8 million or 7 million Jews in the land of Israel today, about another 7 million or less all over the earth. So we have 14 million from 3 tribes that we know about. And the Jews, we could say that the Jews went through a Holocaust. The Jews went through persecution. To become a Jew requires sacrifice. So you should say that you cannot make a comparison to the Jewish people. But at the same time, everywhere else had problems. You had the Black Death, you had famines, you had disasters that occurred in the past that seriously reduced the world population. And in many cases, the Jews suffered less. The Jews also suffered along with their neighbors. In many cases, the Jews suffered less, possibly because of better hygiene, or even circumcision could have been a factor. It inoculates a person from certain diseases, from certain problems. Whatever the case, the Jews often survived better than the Gentiles did throughout their history. So we have 3 tribes. 3 tribes give us about 4 million per tribe. We also have the tribes in Scandinavia. We have about in Sweden 10 million, in Norway about 4 or 5 million, in Denmark about the same. Finland about the same. So they compared tribe to tribe. It's similar to what the Jews have, each of these different tribes. In France, you have a much larger population. In the Netherlands, a much larger population, and also then you have the USA, where we also find the lost tribes of Israel, the USA, and also the British, the offshoots of the British. But those people, they may be considered to be, as well as representing individual tribes of Joseph, they may also be considered as representing an amalgamation of all of the tribes together. So we have other possibilities that the lost tribes of Israel that we identify as Israelites number hundreds of millions, maybe to much more, maybe a little less. We don't know, but the possibility is there. The possibility is there in the prophecy and also in reality. The demographic reality indicates that it is possible. It's not a far-fetched estimation.
I'd like to add one other point, Asher. It's a very short point. The issue of kashrut. The Jew haters, the anti-Semites, always go after this and say it's savage and barbaric. Dr. Temple Grandin, who is famous for redesigning over 50% of the slaughterhouses in the United States to be humane and compassionate to animals, was the subject in 10 years ago, the movie with Claire Danes Temple, and is world renowned and respected as an animal because she's on the, because she's on the autistic spectrum with high functioning autism, Asperger's. There's an idea that it might give such people more intuitive understanding of animals in the animal world. Well, I'm on that spectrum too. Is it true? She makes a good case for it in her books. And she specifically says, this is all crap. She said, that's my field. I'm much happier talking to horses than I am the people. And I redesigned the slaughterhouses because I can't change the fact that people eat meat, but at least I can design them so it's less frightening to the cows before they get slaughtered. She said, I can and she has a doctorate in animal husbandry and teaches at the University of Colorado in Fort Collins. And she said, anyone who talks like this doesn't know what they're talking about. The most humane, if it's done right, and that's very, if it's done wrong, I feel sorry for the chicken or the goat or the cow. But if it's done right, she said, it is the most humane form of slaughter. And I have to, you know what? I have to really publish that in her books, because the Jew haters constantly go after this and say, oh, look how cruel and vicious the Jews are to animals with kosher slaughter. They constantly, and in fact, this is something I'm going to be talking about, is the new Nazis, not white supremacists, the new Nazis who masquerade as patriots, who are in effect the recycled Senator Burton Wheelers and Father Coughlin's and Henry Ford's and Charles Lindbergh's. I say specifically the new Nazis, not to throw around well, you're a Nazi, or well, you're an anti-Semite. I will itemize why I say that in other programs. This is one of their points. You see, the Jews are so cruel and brutal. They have a whole list on their menu: animals, kashrut, kosher slaughter. They always go after this point. They pretend they're concerned with the welfare of animals. These are the same people who advocate euthanasia, the medical murder of the very old, the very young, mentally and physically handicapped people. But as in Alice in Wonderland, what is one of the points? The Queen could say 6 impossible things before breakfast. And someone else said, logical consistency is the bugaboo of small minds. So Temple Grandin says that is absolute BS. Now, her credentials are on Mount Olympus. I make a note to find where she says that so we can publish it. That's all I wanted to say. Now over to Professor Tatias.
The fur trade is being circumscribed in Israel too, by the way. But apropos to Lo's much earlier comment about the short distance from Mesopotamia to points north in Scandinavia, I'd be interested, Yair, from your perspective, closer to home. This is in Bondi Beach. Can you see this?
What?
This is
What was the last point? I didn't understand.
Bondi Beach in New South Wales, Australia.
Yes.
Yes. So
what about it?
I'm interested to why is there such a rise of anti-Semitism so far from the natural habitat of Europe, if you will, or the Arab Middle East, and then whether any of our tribes have ever found any home in such far-flung place like New Zealand and Australia. What's your take on that?
The population of New Zealand and Australia is overwhelmingly from the British Isles. They were the people who founded the country, and they are still comprise the majority of the population. There might be 50, 60, 70% of the population. Not everyone is from that region, but they are the majority, and another important minority are also from other parts of Europe, whom we also understand that people from Europe, who not from the Lost and Tribe countries, but people from Europe who migrate to those areas. In some cases, who are also of Israelite descent. For instance, in Germany, we find that many of the Germans in the 1870s, 1880s, who went to the USA, were different from those who stayed behind. And also, there's something similar happened in England, happened in other areas. The people who migrated are different from those who stayed behind. In some cases, you had one village, one beside the other. All the people from one village get up and leave. All the people from another village stayed behind. And it happened throughout Europe, these cases. And often there were tests done, and it was the age of physical anthropology, and they even found physical differences between those who went to America and those who stayed behind, as if They were different. In England, you had a similar phenomenon between those who went to America and those who stayed in England. And they had often belonged to different social classes, different groups. Had always been different, in other words. People who somehow or other felt different from their neighbours, had stayed together, had always considered themselves as different. And they picked themselves up and left, not always because of economic reasons, for reasons that even the German authorities had remarked upon and could not find explanations for, and they were driven by an unseen force to get out and go. And this is what they did. They came to America, and in America, some of them were a lot of them were anti-Semites. That's the base of American anti-Semitism, to found amongst German Americans. But it is not an overwhelming phenomenon there. It only pertains to a minority. Most German Americans have been supporters of Israel, and even now the evangelical movement, a good portion of those people are descended from German Americans. In other words, they are different from the Germans who stayed behind, because we see here people from Israel who had remained. When we describe in our history, tracing lost in tribes through Europe, we find that they passed through Germany, passed through Greece, they passed through the Balkan areas, they passed through a good portion of Europe. And they kept on going. But here and there, pockets of them remained. And often the pockets of them remained in their own village, their own areas. And ultimately their descendants also left those regions and went to areas such as the USA, such as Britain, such as Australia, and so on, that have been founded by descendants of those tribes of Israel. And nevertheless, in all those regions, you find anti-Semites. You find anti-Semites, so you find people who at one stage were pro-Jewish and then turned against the Jews. And you find the opposite, people who were anti-Jewish in the beginning and then became pro-Jewish. Or people whose fathers were anti-Semitic, they became pro-Jewish, or just the opposite.
Yeah.
This is a known phenomenon. We even find descendants of Jews themselves who become anti-Semitic. But nevertheless, we take everything on the whole. We take it generally, to use a scientific approach, and the law of averages, what the overwhelming majority does, the overwhelming impression it gives us, that's what we take as being the decisive factor. And then, so in Australia, you have anti-Semites. You have quite a lot of anti-Semites, especially amongst people from Europe, from Central Europe, from the Balkans, from the Ukraine, from countries like that, countries that had more anti-Semitism than other portions. So to their descendants who come to Australia are like that, even though a lot of them are different from the areas from areas they came from, and they too, in many cases, also become identified with the Australian people, and the more they identify, the more pro-Jewish or pro-Israel they are. But if you still have anti-Semitic phenomenon, I don't know what you're talking about on Bondi Beach in New South Wales, something anti-Semitic incidents, and you also did have anti-Semitic incidents in Australia. I was in Australia, and you do have anti-Semites there, but most of the people don't care very much one way or the other, and those that do tend to be pro-Jewish or tend to be in favour of the state of Israel.
That beckons the final question connected to Australia, and that is the relations with the Aborigines between Jews and them. They presumably were not born with anti-Semitic sentiments. Are they prone to understand the minority that we are in the world and in Australia and in the Middle East, and how we survive, or we fight to survive as a people?
So first of all, we have also surprise. We have certain Gentiles who never heard of a Jew, don't know what a Jew is. Okay, yeah. So you have not only amongst primitive people, even in Australia had people like that. Even amongst white people, people like that who never really thought about it, never really gave it serious thought. So that too, is something that we come across. I came across Australian Aborigines who are anti-Jewish because they are helped by left-wing elements. Left-wing elements go to them, help them, stand up for them, fight for them, struggle for their rights, to to prevent them from being exploited or discriminated against. So they look up to them, and these left-wing people are, in many cases, anti-Semitic or against the state of Israel. So the Aborigines, I come across Aborigines that also adopted that type of that way of thought. Listen, I was in the university when they're having the students with the University of Warsaw were having a demonstration against Israel in favor of the Palestinians. Most students were in that university were actually pro-Jewish, but they also had a strong left-wing group there who were against Zionism, against the state of Israel, and in a roundabout way also against the Jewish people. So there were, when they're having this demonstration, a few Aborigines there. I don't exactly know what the Aborigines were doing there, so I went up and started talking to them. And I understood that someone had brought them there. They didn't really care what the whole thing was about. If everyone's against the Jews, they join in. There's also a phenomenon we find it amongst everyone. We also find it more amongst the Gentiles and amongst Jews, that if everyone dislikes a certain group or dislikes a certain person, we also find that in school. We grew up in school, so children get into that. One of the boys, one of the girls, is something different about them, dislikable. Everyone dislikes them because that's a dumb thing. And without any rational explanation for it, this is something happened. So to this group, this group mentality also exists. So they had come there because someone had brought them there, and they didn't like Jews, or they didn't like anyone. There was there's another person there actually looks a little bit like an Aborigine. I thought he was one of them because he was with them. So I came up and I started talking to him, and it turned out he wasn't an Aborigine. He was Irish. He was one of the dark type of Irish types. And he says that he himself is against the Jews because the Jews identify. He doesn't like people identifying. He doesn't like people standing out or separating themselves from others. So that was the rationale that he gave for disliking the Jews and being against the state of Israel. And the Aborigines who were there, they seemed to agree with what he was saying. But that doesn't say anything, because they were liable to agree with what anyone said as according to the way it was being said, not or who was saying it, rather than the substance of what was spoken.
Thank you.
So the in other words, Aborigines you should not look for any welcome news from primitive peoples. They're just as bad as others. They're even worse than them. In some cases, Israel has been helped because a certain islanders have representation in the UN. Have spoken out on behalf of the state of Israel. When you get down to it, this is because there was a missionary, an English missionary, or an American missionary, an Anglo-Saxon missionary came there and told them that the Jews are the chosen people, and also told them, gave them what they considered to be salvation. So they associate the Jews with salvation, with this giving of salvation, and therefore they are pro-Jewish. But the person who inspired them to think along this direction was someone who we identify as descended from the lost tribes of Israel. And we find that everywhere. Any other group which has been, where it has been claimed that they are from lost tribes of Israel, they are usually anti-Semitic. And even amongst people in England who claim to be British Israel, for instance, have a group in England who actually, some of them are friends of mine. They sell my books. I correspond with them. Some of them are very nice people, and historically important British personalities came from them and helped the Jewish people, helped the state of Israel. Ord Wingate came out of them. Meinzer Hagen came out of them. The person, Patterson, who led the founder of the Jewish Legion, important people were brought up with the ideas of British Israel and kept them all their lives, and they became champions of the Jewish people. So you have people from amongst this group who have been pro-Jewish, and it has also inspired them to be pro-Jewish. But you have others who have been, for some reason, go in the opposite direction and use what they've been taught as an excuse to be anti-Semitic, and say we are the true Jews, and the Jews are imposters. The Jews are from the Khazars. The Jews are from somewhere else. The Jews are on the opposite side, and we are not part of them. So we have this is the reality. This is what we are faced with, and because of these people who are anti-Semitic, it is often hard for us to get our voices to be trying to say what we have to say. And Jews who have encountered this anti-Semitic aspect of such advocates of such people are prejudiced against it and don't really want to listen to us because of this.
Fascinating.
Rob, I think the time is very late. We've been on for nearly 2 hours. It's been absolutely amazing, and I think we need to have you back again. It's been extremely informative, and we really want to thank you. And I just want to mention that, you know, what your organization does, the Brit, it's so important. And our listeners out there who are going to be watching this, I would advise you to go to HebrewNations.com. You can see your whole history, and I've just been going through the history. And what a small world that Rabbi felt as she lives in the same street as me, across the road from me. I mean, this is such a small world. And Tamar Yona, who Lal knows as well, very well, and I've been on her show, it's such a small world. But for the greater world and the greater, those watching from all over in the small global village of ours, the history of this very important organization, Brit, which combines Jews and non-Jews into understanding the history of the 10 lost tribes. I think I could spend really literally hours discussing what you've achieved, and it's all on the internet, on your amazing site that you have. So I would recommend our viewers there to go onto HebrewNations.com or just Google Brit history, and you'll see such a phenomenal organization and the work that you've done and what you've achieved, and that you still will achieve. And the negativity and the anti-Semitism from all these, you know, people that you've been speaking about, hopefully they'll be watching this and they will realize that they are part of Am Yisrael, and please God, with the coming of Mashiach, and we'll be all reunited back in Israel and with Hashem, is what in the time of the Mashiach. So I want to really thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to have you on. And Rav, you know, coming from Australia, no worries. I don't know, Australia, when you go to Australia, it's incredible. I've been there once with my daughter, and the most famous statement that I heard so many people saying, no worries, because that's a country where there really aren't too many worries. But it really is a special place, and we are very fortunate to have you here in Yerushalayim, and we want to just encourage you to continue in the good work that you do. And Lowell, it would be wonderful if we could have Rav Davidiy again on our show, because there's so much to talk about, and it's been absolutely phenomenal hearing you this evening. So we want to wish you and everybody a Shabbat Shalom, and just all the very best. Lowell, thank you so much for organizing this. Prof. Asher, we want to thank you for always your tremendous input that you give.
Thank you.
It's also it's good to have you as well. And Rav Davidiy, really, thank you very, very much. It's been wonderful hearing you, and you've just enlightened us with such interesting and important facts. So thank you very much.
Just a housekeeping detail. I have the master calendar dates for Aaron Root and Branch Association. The next one I have down formally is July 5th. Is that correct? Do we have anything in the foreseeable future?
We have almost every evening between now and then. I just have so much that it's I'm a little bit holding on to my old coattails, trying to get out the Zoom links and the Facebook events announcement.
Okay.
That's a nice problem to have. Yes.
Yes. I'll wait. You know, again, I will adjust immediately. By the way, my Esher Hai is leaving on Tuesday, so I'll be a bachelor for 2 months. As she drive her to Kennedy Airport to be with her 97-year-old mom in Greece. So I would be even more available.
And Rav, will you be available for future talks as well?
Of course. course.
You'll
yes.
be able to.
We have.
And Rabbi Davidiy, you'll also be available.
That's why I have down July 5th is my next talk. Yeah. That's
Okay.
on
All the
Monday.
very best. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Les, Lowell, Yair, Mazel Tov. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Very much
Laila
appreciate
Tov.
Hashem be with you, all of us. Look at them yourself.
Laila Tov. And
Hazak
we look
Baruch,
forward to seeing you
Hazak Baruch.
again.
Thank you.
Yeah, Rav Yair, we look forward to seeing you again. All the best.
I will be well. Thank you.